Good morning. Welcome to the Huge Porch News Hour for the fifth day in the eighth month in the 16th year of Chungi. So this is the day after Foundation Day. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king at Chengu Kyungji Moon, and let's take our usual jaunt around the kingdom. And right now in Chongpyeong, Tennessee, we have 65 degrees, mostly clear skies. 77 for a high today. Areas of fog this morning, otherwise times of cloud and sun with a thunderstorm around this afternoon. And tonight, partly cloudy, low of 61. And what's going on here? Oh, okay. All right. At father's hometown in Cheongju, North Korea, what is today North Korea anyway, soon to be just plain old Korea, I hope. Mostly clear and 65 right now. Areas of fog. Wait, that's not, that's okay. That's the same one. All right, here we go. 64, not 65. Mostly clear, still mostly clear. And tonight, mostly cloudy, low of 53. Tomorrow, sun and areas of high clouds in the morning, followed by clouds and occasional sunshine, high of 80 degrees. So not bad temperature there. And at the Turnagain Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania, fog and 62 degrees right now, high of 79. Today, areas of morning fog, clouds, and sunshine with showers and spots. Tonight, partly cloudy, low of 53. And in Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, 59 degrees clear. And high of 88 today. Not going to get to 90, just 88 today. Tonight, clear, low of 61. Okay. And at the Suncheon Palace in Korea, currently 75 degrees and a shower. 69 for a low tonight, clear and cloudy. It is cloudy and humid with showers, some heavy. And tomorrow, getting up to 77, cloudy and humid with a shower in spots. At the Gunma Palaces in Japan, 82 and mostly cloudy, becoming cloudy tonight, cloudier, I guess. And then 65 for a low. Tomorrow, very warm, less humid, sun and some with sun and some clouds, high of 86. And in Ilan, Taiwan, it is currently 82, low of 77 tonight, cloudy this evening with a passing shower or two, then partly cloudy. And tomorrow, high of 92, hot and humid, some with sun and some clouds, possible danger of dehydration. All right, gotta watch out for that dehydration. Okay, let's go to Father's Word, see where we here. Okay, and let's see here. And I'm in the book on the Pan-Pacific Providence, chapter 4, section 3.3. And I guess we're kind of about the middle of 3.3 there, right? When a woman gets married, so the usual expression for getting married in Korean for a woman, there are different expressions for men and women. And for women, the expression is that you go to your in-laws' house. That's the expression. And it's still used today, even though most women probably actually, yes, absolutely, definitely do not go to their in-laws' house. They do not move in with their husband who's still living with his parents in 99% of the case. And yet the expression is still, 시집간다, going to the in-laws' house. And so Father is using that expression here and saying, so when a woman gets married, when a woman is married, she does not do so naked. They need to prepare what they are going to own and take those things with them. And apparently, once I don't, yeah, I guess so, but there used to be a tradition where the woman would take whatever clothing she would be wearing for the rest of her life. And the idea was that she should not be a burden on the finances of her new home. Well, in those days, obviously, a woman did in fact move in with the in-laws and move in with the groom who was still living with his parents. Um, so this is kind of harking back to that, I guess, that she needs to take with her everything that she's going to own. Um, so, so the heart of the family that is sending a woman into marriage, in other words, again, the expression is sending a woman to her in-laws' house, is that they want to expand her right of ownership by depending on her own family. In other words, not on her groom's family, but on her own family. And the same is true for the unification family that sends people to the kingdom of heaven or to heaven. The kinfolk want to create a foundation by which a person can go to heaven without feeling ashamed. In other words, without feeling ashamed for what? Well, feeling ashamed for having to depend on others to to provide for them. So to um, be able to sort of provide independently for whatever their needs are, and that is the objective that each individual will also want. That is for certain. Interesting. Of course, this was, I think, I already closed it, but I think he was speaking in early 90s, 92, I believe I saw the date. But it is harking back to a sort of a traditional marriage system, which, Father perhaps is saying that this is actually how it will be in Chonyuguk as well. And he talks, of course, in Father's teaching, he talks about the three generation kingships and the idea of three generations living under one roof and so forth. Um, so perhaps it will be that way again. And there certainly are advantages to having a lot of uncles and aunts and cousins and nephews and nieces around. There's always strength in numbers, both in times of prosperity and in times of need. Um, I was just I was watching a video that reminded me of how one particular ethnic group in India has, according to this video, and my own experience tells me this is probably correct. There's one particular small ethnic group in India has captured 80% of the motels in the United States. In other words, they own and they operate 80% of the motels in the United States. And they've done this, they've accomplished this as a group through a process that, according to this video, began in the early 1970s, where where one family came over from one family of that ethnic group came over, and they didn't have very many skills, but they realized that they could, if they could somehow scrounge enough money together to purchase a motel or lease a motel or whatever, anyway, get a hold of a motel, then the family could live in one or two rooms, and then they could uh, use the other rooms for cash flow, and they could provide the labor, and their family members would provide the labor, and that way they could undercut the surrounding motels in the surrounding area. And then once they built up a certain level of cash, then they would buy another motel and send one of their cousins over to that motel to operate it, and sort of continuing this process over and over again until about what is it now, 50 years or so later, they have 80% of the motels in the United States. And I'm sure, you know, some of you have traveled across the United States, and sure enough, yeah, you, we go to Motel 6 or we go to what are the other ones? My wife and I prefer Motel 6, but there are others as well. What is it? Something 8. What was it? The 8? Anyway, there's the 6, and there's the 8, and then there are others. But um, uh, we often find that they are operated by people from the subcontinent of India, not necessarily all of the best quality. Super 8, that is it. Super 8, Super 8. I once wrote a review for a Super 8 motel saying, well, not all Super 8 motels are actually super. That's, that is a true statement. But anyway, yes, they've used their family and the extension of their family to do this in America. And I think that's an illustration of the advantages of having an extended family. Excuse me while I. All right. So, and if we can do that, that I think that's great to support each other economically and financially, so that the group as a whole can prosper. Just make sure if you're going to do motels, please make sure that they are in fact super. Otherwise, I won't be able to give you 5 stars. All right, let's go. And let's see. Now let's begin with this one over here. Okay. Um, I was going to begin with Trump, in the Ukraine and his change of sort of attitude towards Ukraine. But before we go there, I want to tell you about an experience that I've been having, or I did have over the past, I guess, about roughly 36 hours, basically since the end of the Foundation Day event. And that is that I've been exposed to a very different uh, perspective on China from what um, I am, and perhaps you are also accustomed to hearing. And um, during the process, by the way, I was also able to observe a conversation between the king and the person presenting this very new and different perspective from what we are accustomed to on China. And I think I can summarize his point of view by saying that, about summarize it this way, that China and Taiwan are brothers, and China is Cain and Taiwan is Abel. And so, if you go back to the Genesis story, Cain killed Abel because after his parents' fall, then the parents were not able to really love their children with God's love, because they were cut off from God's love, and were not able to learn or be trained in God's love. And so Cain was not getting, the kind of love he would that he should have had from their parents. And also Abel was arrogant and not really loving him at all. And this sort of built up, and Cain eventually sort of exploded in anger and somehow killed his brother Abel. Um, and so you got to understand Cain's position, basically, that Cain needs love, but he's not getting it. And so Abel, in order to survive, and in order to basically in order to survive, should have loved Cain and helped Cain um, receive God's love, the love, and in fact, in the OSDP, the point is OSDP teachings. The father makes the point that Abel receives love from God. He has this vertical relationship with God by accomplishing the foundation of faith. And so he has this vertical relationship with God, and he's receiving love from God. Cain is not. So Abel needs to take that love he's getting from God and then add his own love to that, and pass this sort of this extra love, this double dose of love to Cain. And that is the formula for achieving Cain's natural subjugation. And so this person is applying that formula to the relationship between, or advocates that we apply that formula to the relationship between Taiwan and China, Taiwan being Abel and China being Cain. So he says that all this criticism that we make of the Chinese Communist Party is actually misguided. I said it's a different perspective, all right, and it's counterproductive, misguided and counterproductive. That and I think he's saying sort of that China it sort of drives China into a defensive position, where it feels that it has to be bellicose and so forth and so on. Like I told you in the beginning, this is a different perspective. No, until now, well, perhaps still, we've assumed that the best way to prevent a takeover, a military takeover or any kind of takeover of Taiwan by China, or at least a military takeover of Taiwan by China, is to build up Taiwan's defenses so as to make a possible invasion as expensive as possible for China, so as to prevent them from making that decision to give the green light for an invasion. Um, but this person advocates for something a little bit different in that he says, well, and he doesn't deny that. He doesn't discourage that, but what he says is that what is he saying? Well, clearly he repeated over and over again, no, that criticism of China is counterproductive. Criticism of the CCP is counterproductive, and he was critical of uh, op-eds and uh, editorials in the Washington Times and also in Father's newspaper in Japan, the Sakai Nippon. And he said that these kinds of things just um, basically make it impossible for blood center families in China to operate with any kind of freedom. And apparently now there are four, he said, blood center members of blood center family who are in prison in China. Um, and he blames this sort of criticism of the Chinese Communist Party by the Washington Times and Sakai Nippon for this fact. He said that the blood center family members are being uh, treated by the Chinese police, the CCP police, as jointly responsible for the anti-CCP stance taken by Washington Times and Sakai Nippon. It's very, very interesting. I don't want to say anything more about him because I don't want to give information that would let people know who he is. But it's a different perspective. And as I said, the king spoke with him spoke with him at length over a meal. And the king was respectful and loving. I don't know how convinced he was, but he was certainly respectful and loving towards this point of view. But something to think about. It is definitely something to think about. Hmm. So, uh, So, should I even go to this article in Breitbart now? I don't know. Uh, okay. Well, I've got a VPN going, so maybe it's okay. Uh, that sort of limits my um, choice of stories, doesn't it? Look how happy everybody is. Look how, yeah, okay, we can point out how happy everybody is. Is everybody happy? Let me look in the back. This guy doesn't look like so happy. What can you say? Uh, I don't know. I have to mull this over a bit more. So, his model of Cain and Abel is, sounds right. Anyway, we'll see. We will see what happens here. Okay, so maybe I better go to this other one instead. Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting times. Okay, here. Let me see here. Trump, the realist, strikes again on Ukraine. It's an opinion, and of course, this points out the fact that President Trump now is saying that, well, he's sort of changed his stance now, and he's sort of moving away from Russia, as I see it. And now he's saying, you know what? If Ukraine has the proper amount of support from EU and NATO, uh, which in turn will be supported by the US, then it can reconquer all of its territory. And then Russia came out and said, okay, well, bring it on. This means that we're at war with EU and NATO. So things are getting a bit iffy there. So we'll see what's going on here. This is an opinion piece in the Washington Examiner. Let's see what this guy has to say. Beginning of President Donald Trump's second term dismayed the Republican Party's hawkish wing. Yeah, well, that's right, it did. In their view, Trump's conciliatory stance on Russia undermined key allies, weakened its deterrence, and rewarded a ruthless dictator for waging an illegal and immoral war. This diminished the United States' global leadership, the maintenance of which is among its central priorities. The culmination of their early term dismay came when Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance dressed down Ukrainian President Zelensky during a February 28th Oval Office meeting, meant to end with the signing of the Ukraine-U.S. Mineral Resources Agreement. The meeting instead ended suddenly following a fiery exchange between Zelensky and Vance over Ukraine's perceived lack of gratitude. The spectacle marked a low point in Ukraine-U.S. relations and significantly dimmed the prospects of robust partnership under Trump. In the aftermath of the meeting, the Trump administration suspended the provision of intelligence and military aid to Ukraine. Russian officials and the GOP's ascendant isolationist wing cheered, particularly over the contributions of Vance, the administrator's most outspoken critic of U.S. involvement in the war. But in the months since, the Trump administration has undergone a seismic shift on the war in Ukraine. In May, Trump called Putin crazy on Truth Social following his bombing campaigns in Kiev and Odessa. And then at a July cabinet meeting, Trump bluntly claimed that he was not happy with Putin for his barbarity and intransigence. Trump's best efforts to charm and cajole Putin also came up short. A pair of high level summits, including the August Peace Summit in Alaska, failed to deliver even Trump's minimum expectation of a temporary ceasefire, while Putin enjoyed the prestige of a red carpet welcome on U.S. soil. At every turn, Trump extended his hand and pushed for a negotiated peace, only for Putin to sabotage his efforts. Trump, who once naively believed, and naively is this guy's opinion, he could charm Putin into a quick deal now appears to see Putin for the former KGB foreign intelligence officer he is. Trump's Ukraine pivot crystallized on Tuesday following a meeting with Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly. Quote, after getting to know, and this quotation is very important here, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, unquote, Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act, unquote. So this is probably a historic post by Trump. It shows that he's really come probably 180 degrees from where he started um, during the campaign, where he said that he could solve the war in 24 hours. So this is certainly quite different from that. Trump also explicitly stated that NATO member countries should shoot down Russian aircraft should they violate NATO airspace. The stunning shift seemed to catch even Zelensky himself off guard, and possibly even Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who just hours earlier publicly supported a negotiated end to the war rather than a Ukrainian military victory. The turn sent the GOP's hawks into a state of jubilation. Lindsey Graham is the hawk of all hawks. Lindsey Graham called the move a bold and necessary shift, while Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, called it music to our ears, and Mitt Romney a monumental realignment. Neither side, however, should celebrate or despair too soon. Trump shares neither side's ideological commitments. If his nearly 5 years as president have proven anything, it's that he's not ideological by nature, and this is especially true in the realm of foreign policy. Though he has demonstrated a naive overconfidence in his diplomatic abilities, he is a realist and a pragmatist, adjusting his use of leverage in ways consistent with shifting circumstances. The result pleases the Hawks today, but it could very well please the isolationists tomorrow should circumstances shift. Okay, that's a short one, I guess. I think he could have gone on a bit longer, but anyway, that seems to be the end of it. It is the end of it. So what happens now? Does this mean that does this mean that NATO really is going to start shooting down Russian aircraft? Because now, right, Putin. Let me see here. Okay. Putin is now saying basically that we're at war. NATO at war with Russia, says Kremlin, as drone incursions continue in Europe. And Russia, this is Al Jazeera, Russia says no choice but war after Trump U-turn on Ukraine. Let's take a look at this Al Jazeera story. Russia says no choice but war after Trump U-turn on Ukraine. Kremlin also says U.S.-Russia rapprochement yields close to zero results as fears grow in Europe of Ukraine's spillover. This is, I guess, what is this? This aftermath. Local officers take pictures inside a school building that was damaged in what local authorities called a Ukrainian drone attack in the town of Foros, Crimea. So Crimea is currently under Russian administration, and so this, I guess, would be Ukraine striking its former territory in Crimea. The Kremlin has announced it has no alternative but to continue waging war as it pushed back on United States President Donald Trump's sudden sea change towards Ukraine that saw him brand Russia a paper tiger. President Trump did use that term, yeah. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov hit back at Trump's claim that Ukraine could, in effect, win the war declaring on Wednesday that Russia would be continuing its offensive on Ukraine to ensure our interests and achieve the goals. We are doing this for both the present and the future of our country for many generations to come. Therefore, we have no alternative, he said in a radio interview with Russia's RBC radio station. And remember what the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told a group of EU officials, supposedly in private, that China could not afford for Russia to lose the Ukrainian war, meaning, I guess, that China is going to do what it takes, whatever it takes, to at least keep the war going, if not a Russian victory. And of course, keeping the war going is certainly good for China because it distracts the United States away from East Asia. Tuesday had seen Trump throw his weight behind Ukraine after meeting with Zelensky. Okay, we know about that. Okay. Signaling his rapprochement with Russia is over, U.S. President said Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. Russia's war was making it look like a paper tiger with a failing economy, he said. Look at that, look at that, look at that. Watch out, better not let Vance see those eyes. On Wednesday, Peskov pushed back. Who's Peskov? Who's Peskov? Kremlin spokesperson. Okay. On Wednesday, Peskov pushed back against Trump's paper tiger remark, insisting Russia was more of a bear, not a paper tiger. Okay. Though he conceded the economy, which is slowing after 3 years of rapid growth and with stubborn inflation, was facing some headwinds. He said it was wrong to think that Ukraine could recapture land taken by Moscow's army. The idea that Ukraine can recapture something is, from our point of view, mistaken, he said. The Kremlin spokesman also poured scorn on Trump's attempted rapprochement, which saw him welcome Russian President Vladimir Putin to a summit in Alaska last month, saying it yielded close to zero results. I guess that's feeling is mutual on that one, yeah. In a separate development on Wednesday, Russia's finance minister proposed raising the rate of value-added tax from 20 to 22% to finance defense and security, as analysts predicted the country's rate of economic growth would plummet to around 1% from 4.3% last year. And raising the tax means that more money is being taken out of the economy and while being put into, to weapons and ammunition, and also, everything else that it takes to fight a war, uniforms, clothing, food, and transport, and everything. So that would be a greater burden on the economy. We'll have to see. So they're saying that that Russia's growth next year will be 1% for this year, right? So yeah, it sounds like that 1% is expected for this year. Okay. After or is this next year predicted the country's rate of economic growth? Raising the rate of value. Okay. It doesn't really say clearly, but I think it's probably this year. After the Alaska summit and meetings with Zelensky and prominent European leaders at the White House, Trump announced he was arranging for direct talks between leaders. But Putin has not shown any interest in meeting Zelensky, and Moscow has only intensified its bombardment of Ukraine, often targeting civilians in residential areas while committing a series of provocative violations of Eastern European airspace. Last week, Estonia said 3 Russian fighter jets violated its airspace not long after 20 Russian drones entered Poland's airspace, raising fears among Europe's NATO countries of a spillover from the Ukraine war. On Tuesday, NATO had warned Russia about its actions, reminding the country of its ironclad adherence to Article 5 of the alliance's founding treaty, which commits all member states to mutual defense in the event of an attack on any one of them. And I'm sure this is intended as a deterrent, but the problem with deterrence is that if the other side doesn't stand down as a result of the deterrence, then you actually have to You actually have to go to war. Otherwise, your deterrence loses all credibility. On Wednesday, Spain's defense ministry said a military jet with Defense Minister Margarita Robles on board suffered a GPS disturbance that morning while flying near Russia's Kaliningrad enclave on its way to Lithuania. No further details were reported. The incident follows a similar case at the end of last month, which saw the GPS system of a plane carrying European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen jammed while en route to Bulgaria. The European Union spokesperson said at the time that Bulgarian authorities suspected the incident was due to interference by Russia. On Wednesday, Ukraine carried out an overnight drone strike on the uh, very long name petrochemical plant in central Russia's very long name region, according to the regional governor. The strike, which sparked a fire, was the second such attack on a major industrial facility in the Russian region in a week. Last week, Ukraine attacked the same complex controlled by energy giant Gazprom. Kyiv has intensified drone attacks on Russia's vast oil and gas infrastructure in the past weeks, targeting refineries and export-bound pipelines as peace talks with Russia falter. Ukrainian drone attack on the southern city of let's go ahead and try this one. Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk. That sounds right. Killed two people, according to long name. The regional governor of long name. Okay. So that's it. They didn't mention the drones that were shutting down air traffic in where's that? Netherlands or Denmark? I think it was Denmark. It was anyway. Let's see here. Let's see. Drones in you. Yeah, okay, Denmark. Yeah, okay. So this is Copenhagen. We read about this a couple of days ago, and that also maybe turns out maybe Russia. Although this is the perfect opportunity for someone who wants to do a false flag incident, right? So I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying that this would be the perfect opportunity. So, well, fly a few drones over Copenhagen Airport, and then someone says, "Oh, it must be Russia," this kind of thing. So, could be a bunch of teenagers. It could be. I don't know what kind of drones they were, whether it's something that a teenager might build or buy or something like that. But things are getting so going. Things are going in a new direction now, and um, they're going in a dangerous direction. Russia is saying that, hey, all right, bring it on. Let's go to war. But if President Trump is right that Russia is a paper tiger, in other words, its economy is faltering, which may be true. I don't know, may be true, uh, or it may not be true. Obviously, someone has briefed President Trump to make him change his mind, and um, I guess we've discovered that we can't necessarily trust the word of those who are briefing the president. They often have their own agendas. So we'll see where this goes. We'll see where it goes. Okay. Meanwhile, and this is also something we covered just briefly before, but I think we have more news on this. So let's do this again. Um, this article, a new Pentagon strategy to focus on homeland in the Western Hemisphere. So someone like Xi Jinping, for example, could look at this and say, "Yeah, this is great." And someone like my friend, I'll call him a friend, um, who's advocating the different perspective that I talked about before, would also sort of, I think, probably breathe a sigh of relief at something like this, if there isn't quite as much. Well, he would like to see less animosity between the U.S., Japan on the one hand, and China on the other hand. Mm. Hmm. And we'll see. Well, it's going to take some thinking. Going to take some getting used to. We'll see how that turns out. All right. So the Pentagon's top national security focus will mirror that of President Donald Trump's America First agenda, with multiple U.S. officials telling Military Times that the this is from the okay, is this from Military Times? Maybe so. Okay. We'll see at the bottom of the story. That the department will prioritize protecting the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. Countering China will remain a key national security interest of the new national defense strategy, which is expected to be released soon, officials said. The last story we read on this said that the final copy of this was going to be released in 2026. I guess that's soon, right? The Pentagon document lays out the military plans to increase lethality, deter aggression, confront adversaries, and defend America's borders. Mission one official said was why Trump was elected. Increase lethality, deter aggression, confront adversaries, and defend America's borders. Well, at least in terms of the words, yes, but it's the content of those words, how we're going to define those phrases and words is what's important. Republican voters in the 2024 presidential election ranked the economy and immigration as their most important issues, which Trump vowed to address and bring under control. On January 20th, on his first day in office, Trump signed an executive order calling on U.S. Northern Command to help seal the borders and maintain the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of the United States by repelling forms of invasion, including unlawful mass migration, narcotics trafficking, human smuggling, and trafficking and other criminal activities. Protecting the border is the top priority for the base, and I think the moderates too. So this shift is fulfilling that promise, said one official who spoke to Military Times on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive policy information. Defense of the American homeland has historically been the top national security priority for Republican and Democrat presidents alike. To achieve this goal, the Pentagon has used a combination of projecting military power forward to meet threats where they are, building alliances to work together against common enemies, maintaining a strong nuclear deterrent, and building a missile defense capability to protect key population centers. Let's stop a minute and think about what this means for Taiwan. There's always been this, where most of the time there's been this strategic ambiguity with respect to Taiwan. There was ambiguity as to whether or not the United States would actually intervene in a situation where there is a kinetic military move against Taiwan by the CCP and their PLA, the People's Liberation Army. This would, at least in my mind, and probably in the mind of CCP leaders, including Xi Jinping, would seem to indicate that the answer is no, that the United States will not intervene. That would seem to indicate that. So does that increase the possibility of China actually invading Taiwan? Hmm. I don't know. I have to ask Xi Jinping. And I'm the guy I remember where I was one of the. I'm not alone, all right. I'm not alone. But anyway, I'm a guy who was saying that Putin would not invade Ukraine because it would be a foolish thing to do. And I was right. It was a foolish thing to do. But you know what? He did it anyway. So these world leaders, they don't watch the King's Report. So, you know, I can speculate on whether uh, it would be a good idea for Xi Jinping to invade Taiwan or not from his point of view, but he doesn't necessarily uh, follow my logic, I guess. But Xi Jinping certainly has to take into consideration the fact that if he does invade, that there will be economic sanctions, um, and the Chinese banks will likely be taken off the dollar system, and that would certainly cripple them. And yes, China has nukes, but far fewer nukes than the United States. And so it's probably not a good idea for them to start uh, firing their nukes at the United States, um, at least at this time. I don't know. They're, of course, hoping to change that situation in a few years. All right. Anyway, let's see what else is going on here. After the U.S. was attacked on September 11, 2001, Washington shifted to a counter-terror focus as near-peer competitor Beijing continued to develop its military. During the first Trump administration, the Pentagon reprioritized to focus on great power competition with China and Russia over countering terrorism. Keeping its competitive advantage over China and Russia remained the department's top priority under the Biden administration. One official stressed to Military Times this week that the new NDS will not be a complete shift away from China. Instead, the official said the Pentagon can use this hyper focus on the Western Hemisphere to better counter Chinese malign activity in Latin America, a region often thought of as America's backyard. And I think that exact expression was in that previous article we read on this subject. For too long, China and Russia and Iran have been active in Latin America, and Washington's response has often been somewhere between non existent and ineffective, said Bradley Bowman, senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. However, analysts, including Bowman, cautioned that if the U.S. only brings a military hammer to a region that needs interagency and public-private sector support for its economic challenges, the U.S. will lose the competition with China and Latin America and waste a lot of money and military resources. Latin America, has been a difficult issue for the United States for more than 100 years. I would say ever since the Spanish-American War. That was Spanish-American War, of course, basically made the United States a colonial power, and it's about Spanish-American War, and then the building of the Panama Canal in the early 20th century. And the United States has never really been able to find an effective solution to its policy objectives in Latin America. Sending in the Marines was generally the default solution that was or the default option that was used in many cases, especially in the first half of the 20th century, and that didn't work well in the long run anyway. It made one banana company very rich, but which is still rich, but it didn't really bring Latin America closer to the United States. And I guess the Democrats in the past couple of Democrat administrations have said, okay, well, let's open our southern border. Let's let them all in. Anybody who wants to come, anybody who can make it to the border gets to come into the United States, and we're going to take care of them. That hasn't worked very well. That has created a huge backlash among Americans, and is, I would say, maybe a major reason that President Trump was able to win the last presidential election. So we'll see what this does. Obviously, as this Bowman guy says, a military solution alone is going to be a disaster. That's going back to the Marines of the early 20th century. He also warned that defending U.S. vital interests in the Pacific, Europe, and Middle East while adopting a more robust military posture in Latin America could quickly exacerbate the existing shortfalls in military capacity. And remember already who was it? Was it the commander of the Eighth Army or the commander of U.S. forces in Korea telling or saying publicly that numbers aren't important, rather it's capabilities that are important, or something to that effect. Basically implying that the United States plans to reduce numbers in Korea. And sure enough, now President Trump has, or I think, not, no, 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 I'm sorry. Let me back up on that. Um, there is discussion that the U.S. may reduce its forces in Korea by something like 4,500, which would be about 16%. Let's see here. Okay, that's meaning of your something. Okay. So this is all that's June, 17 days ago. This is Atlantic Council. It's a leftist. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I don't see anything recent. Maybe it's not. I remember seeing something recent, but Google doesn't seem to be picking it up. But here, Atlantic Council, though, I think this is probably worth looking at. This is, of course, is a leftist globalist magazine or organization, but and it does not have very much influence in a Republican administration. But this is the kind of thing that Democrats are looking for, and they may have uh, influence. This is September 9, so not too long ago. Let's take a little bit of a break from that last one. A debate on the future of U.S. forces Korea is underway, and it is at risk of becoming a political brawl rather than a strategic analysis. Media speculation fueled by proposed USFK cuts in a wide-ranging report from two prominent U.S. researchers has amplified expectation that the Trump administration will cut USFK personnel. The Senate's draft version of the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act seemed designed to guard against a precipitous move by prohibiting funds to reduce U.S. personnel stationed in or deployed to South Korea below 28,500. Absent certification from military and executive branch leaders that reductions are in the national security interest of the United States and undertaken after allied consultations. Unfortunately, this figure is in some ways a legacy of encrusted layers of decisions made under changing circumstances since the armistice of 1953. U.S. forces in Korea now reflect what remained after a series of unilateral withdrawals and redeployments that became permanent removals, leading to President George W. Bush's 2008 pledge to maintain 28,500 troops rather than a clear design. No military officer or civilian analyst I have encountered would claim that a clean slate analysis would result in what we have now. It's not 2008 anymore, and any reassessment of USFK must start by accounting for the dramatic changes since the 28,500 troop number was pledged. Though the threat on the Korean Peninsula and in the region has grown considerably, so has South Korea's ability to defend itself from absorption by the North. Deterring a conventional North Korean invasion to conquer South Korea, something USFK commanders have long been testifying as beyond the North's capabilities, should not be the basis for USFK's future. However, as the threat from North Korea has evolved, particularly with Pyongyang increasing its nuclear and asymmetric non-nuclear capabilities, deterrence has been crumbling, particularly of gray zone aggression and of limited nuclear attacks in the event of war. And especially, now that North Korea has seen what Russia was able to do with drones in Ukraine, and both sides, with drones in Ukraine, they're saying, "Hey, this is great. We need our own fleet of massive amount of drones." With an increasingly aggressive and powerful China as the pacing threat for Pentagon planning, simultaneous threats from China and North Korea, including nuclear escalation, should now define the baseline for USFK posture analysis. As numerous analyses, war games, and tabletop exercises have demonstrated, we should discard questionable assumptions like Korea as a force posture black hole. We should discard questionable assumptions like Korea as a force posture black hole and other artificial barriers to and biases against considering the Korean aspect of a US-China conflict and vice versa. Mm. Korea has no interest, especially the current Lee Jae-myung administration has no interest in helping the United States deter or fight China. At a minimum, they want to stay out of that war. And in the case of China attacking Taiwan, uh, they may actually refuse or somehow try to block USFK forces from potentially intervening on the side of Taiwan, assuming that that's what the U.S. wants to do, which may not be an assumption, a correct assumption. With these blinders removed, the potential for a restructured U.S. forces Korea to help deter China, not just North Korea, becomes more clear. So this is what I think people in the current US, Korean administration are saying. Whoa, 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 whoa! Stop! Hold on a second. We don't want anything to do with deterring China. All right, we don't want to make China our enemy. China is our biggest trading partner, and besides, we are leftists. We are communists. So, no, they wouldn't say that, but that's basically what they are. Though the specifics are debatable, a list like the one below would account for the requirements USFK needs for dual deterrence to help deter and defeat both nuclear and non-nuclear threats from North Korea and China simultaneously or sequentially. Nuclear deterrent by who? So you're going to give South Korea nuclear weapons? What are you talking about? This is what, oh, I see, this is what USFK needs. But USFK needs a nuclear deterrent. Okay, so you're going to station nuclear weapons in South Korea again. These used to be on the peninsula, and they were pulled out anyway some time ago, um, including theater level nuclear capable systems. The ability to conduct rapid non-nuclear strikes against important targets throughout North Korea, against key Chinese military facilities, and against Russian Far East military facilities. Active and passive defenses against missiles and manned or unmanned aircraft. So, South Koreans are just interested in surviving an attack by North Korea with the minimum amount of damage, and they're not interested in getting involved in what they regard as America's sort of a global strategic posture, right? So this kind of thing, I think, is not going to go over very well in the current South Korea. Unfortunately, I agree that this is probably necessary, but they're not going to get this. At least not if the South Koreans have anything to say about it. Active and passive defenses against missiles and manned and unmanned aircraft. Okay, so this is one that the South Koreans would definitely like to have. Yeah, okay. Sufficient ground forces to provide protection and security to U.S. personnel, including support for a potential non-combatant evacuation. I've told you about my conversation with a U.S. diplomat that I had long, long time ago. When was that? Probably in the 90s or maybe even late 80s, where I said, listen, I don't expect any Marines to come save me. 15 minutes after the first bomb falls, I said, artillery shell falls, all the roads in South Korea are going to be so clogged that no one's going to go anywhere. Yeah, I think basically shelter in place is going to be the norm of the day if war ever breaks out. Intelligence collection, analysis, and targeting capability. Okay. Medical, logistical, and maintenance support sufficient to support high intensity combat. All right. Medical, logistical, and maintenance support. And some of this may involve Japan because, I was actually born in a hospital in northern Kyushu in Japan during the Korean War. That was part of the U.S.'s involvement in the Korean War. In other words, wounded troops in the war were being flown to that hospital in Fukuoka, Japan. So this may imply setting up a similar hospital medical facilities in Japan, I suspect. Capabilities and bases sufficient to pose a delimited China's calculus for war with the United States, for example, either accept that South Korea will serve as a sanctuary for key U.S. military support functions and for platforms that can hold Beijing at risk, or expend an unacceptable number of missiles and aircraft to neutralize these capabilities, while also likely drawing South Korea into the war. While also likely drawing South Korea into the war. So, yeah, no is the word that you're going to hear from South Korea, right? At least from the majority. I mean, some South Koreans will say, yeah, yeah, that's right. This is absolutely right. But I'm afraid they're in a minority, in a small minority, I would say. Um, Perhaps, 25, 30% of South Koreans would go along with this kind of thing, but I think the vast majority would, a substantial majority would not. That's my concern. And what do you do? What do you do in a situation, right? When who was it? Oh yeah, Newt Gingrich was saying recently, right, that South Korea is sort of sliding into communist dictatorship, right? And he was saying in the context of trying to say something to help out Hak Ja-han, but he is right in that it is sliding to appears to be sliding into a communist dictatorship. Um, you know, woulda, shoulda, coulda. I mean, we probably should have continued the VOC education, which was suspended, I think, in the late 80s, especially after the election of Kim Dae-jung. But anyway, we'll see what the consequences of that are, right? To meet these requirements, USFK could be restructured to be more capable and efficient with a focus on three key aspects below: modernized air power, advanced land based missiles, and a more resilient, protected foundation. So we're not talking about the South Korean forces, we're talking about USFK, US forces that are in South Korea. Mostly the 8th Army and I don't know which Air Force it is, but the Air Force also has a significant contingent here in Korea. Marines, not so much, I think. Navy, a little bit all along the southern coast. USFK's air power should be modernized and streamlined. The bulk of USFK's combat power today is in the US 7th, thank you very much, 7th Air Force, whose commander is also USFK's deputy commander. Commander, of course, being the 8th Army commander. Though it's being reinforced with more fighters and experimenting with larger super squadrons, it is qualitatively being left behind. US forces Japan's 5th Air Force is being equipped with new F-35 fighters, while older F-16s are being transferred to Korea to make room. South Korea's Air Force has also started flying F-35s and is acquiring more. Meanwhile, US F-35s have only been temporarily deployed to Korea for training, with reported plans for permanent stationing in the future. So it sounds like South Korea has a better Air Force than the US, at least in what's present in Korea itself. F-35s are intended to replace F-16s and have an enhanced capability to survive in an advanced threat environment, according to the US Air Force. Given China's robust air defense capabilities and rapid enhancements of North Korean air defenses that could be looming with Russian military technical support to North Korea, it is time to rapidly transition USFK to F-35s. To address the growing challenges to nuclear deterrence, at least one squadron of these F-35As should be nuclear certified, trained, and prepared to be dual capable with wartime nuclear and non-nuclear missions from multiple bases. All right, so we have more stuff here like that. Oh, I'm already past time. Wow. Where did time go? All right, so that's all I have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll perhaps talk about this more later as time goes on. God bless, Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.